The following is a DW Ancient Egypt production. The 18th dynasty is considered the high point of ancient Egyptian civilization. Amenhotep III rules at the high point of this dynasty, making this the pinnacle of Egyptian power during a time that the Egyptologists call the Golden Age of ancient Egypt. Amenhotep III's great-grandfather, Tuthmosis III, as noted in the previous episode, had laid the foundations of the Egyptian empire by his campaigns into Syria, Nubia, and Libya. Hardly any military activity was called for under Amenhotep III during his 30 years of rule. Only Nubia required minor attention, which was handled by his son and viceroy of Kush, Mieroop. A striking characteristic of Amenhotep III's reign is a series of over 200 large commemorative stone scarabs that document the first 12 years of his reign. These scarabs should be considered the first telegrams in history. These are stone-carved beetles that announce key events on the bottom in hieroglyphs. About 100,000 were carved at a time and distributed throughout the kingdom, including Syria, Palestine, and Nubia. The earliest one, of year 2, is known as the marriage scarab and records his marriage to his non-royal wife, Queen T. Although a commoner, Queen T came from a prominent family. Her father was a military official, and her brother was vizier of Lower Egypt under Amenhotep III. Another set of scarabs, also of year 2, records how Amenhotep III captured 56 head of wild cattle in a single day. This is known as the Wild Bull Hunt scarab. On a third collection of scarabs, Tuthmosis III records how he killed 102 lions in the first 10 years of reign. This lion hunt scarab is the most common, and many have been found outside the boundaries of Egypt, which they obviously served as a type of imperial newspaper. Another type of correspondence at the time was the Amarna letters. These cuneiform tablets, written primarily in Akkadian, the regional language of diplomacy for this time period, consisted of over 300 diplomatic letters. These were to and from the heads of state from Egypt to Babylonia, Assyria, Syria, Canaan, Cyprus, Mitanni, and the Hittites. Begun by Amenhotep III, they would greatly increase during the reign of his successor, Akhenaten. This archive contains a wealth of information about cultures, kingdoms, events, and individuals in a period from which few written sources survive. They also contain the first mention of a Near Eastern group known as the Habaru, which may be linked to the Hebrews. These letters document frequent requests by these rulers for gold and other numerous gifts from the pharaoh. In one famous correspondence, Amenhotep III is quoted by the Babylonian king Kadashman-Enlil I in firmly rejecting the latter's entreaty to marry one of the pharaoh's daughters. From time immemorial, no daughter of the king of Egypt is given to anyone. The wealth of Egypt during this period came from international trade and the abundant supply of gold from the land of Kush and from the mines of the Wadi Hammamat. It was this great wealth and booming economy that led to such an outpouring of artistic talent in all aspects of the arts. Amenhotep III has the distinction of having the most surviving statues of any Egyptian pharaoh, with over 250 of his statues having been discovered. These statues span his entire life and provide a series of portraits covering the entire length of his reign. Major examples of this artwork include the orange alabaster statue of Amenhotep III standing beside Sobek, the crocodile god, the wooden coffin of Tuya, the mother of Queen T, which was gilded in gold, the colossal statue of Amenhotep III, the fine quartzite statue of Amenhotep III from the Luxor Temple, and the amazing green stone portrait of Queen T, which was discovered in a temple in the Sinai by Flinders Petrie in 1904. Amenhotep III's master architect, Amenhotep son of Hapu, is one of the few architects to be known to us by name. Like the great 3rd dynasty architect Imhotep, He was elevated to the status of a god in the later Ptolemaic period. There are several surviving statues of him as a scribe, portraying him throughout his life. Amenhotep was allowed to build his mortuary temple adjacent to that of the pharaoh. This honor was quite rare and indicated that Amenhotep was highly respected by the time of his death, despite the fact that he was a commoner and had only entered civil service in his late 40s. Excavated around 1934, it measures 45 by 110 meters and is surrounded by 3 shrines. His first courtyard contains a 25 by 26 meter water basin of considerable depth, fed by groundwater from the Nile. 20 trees were planted in pits around the basin. The temple at the end of the courtyard was adorned with a pillared portico, and the temple was slightly elevated on a terrace. Amenhotep built extensively for the pharaoh at the Temple of Karnak. He dismantled the 4th pylon of the Temple of Amun to build the 3rd pylon and created a new entrance for this structure. He also started work on the 10th pylon and built a new temple to the goddess Ma'at. Amenhotep III's enormous mortuary temple on the west bank of the Nile was, in its day, the largest religious complex in Thebes. Unfortunately, he chose to build it too close to the floodplain, and less than 200 years later, it stood in ruins. Much of the masonry was stolen by the later pharaohs for their own building projects. All that remains now of this temple are the 2 imposing statues of the king. At 18 meters high, these statues are known as the Colossi of Memnon. This is in fact a complete misnomer, arising from the classical recognition of the statues as the Ethiopian prince Memnon, who fought at Troy. In 27 BC, a large earthquake shattered the northern statue, collapsing it from the waist up and cracking the lower half. Following its rupture, the remaining lower half of this statue was then reputed to sing at dawn and dusk. The phenomenon was probably caused by the effect on the stone at the radical temperature changes at dawn and dusk. These sounds ceased after later repairs were carried out by the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus around 196 AD. In his later years, Amenhotep III moved permanently to Thebes. Normally, the pharaoh would have lived in Memphis, which had always been the administrative capital. Now Thebes was gaining importance as a religious capital, and future kings would spend their time in both places. At Thebes, Amenhotep III built his residence called the Malkada Palace on the west bank of the Nile. Made of painted mud brick, much of it has disappeared. At this location, he built a huge pleasure lake for his wife Queen T so that she could sail around on their barge. This boat was called the Aten Gleams. The lake was over a mile long and a quarter-mile wide. The sun cult of Aten appears to have been growing toward the end of his reign, for it was also at this time that Amenhotep III took another name, the dazzling sun disk of all lands. This worship of Aten would become radicalized by his son during the next reign and have drastic consequences for the priests of Amun. The teeth of Amenhotep III were so bad he may have been sedated during his last years and may not have been able to rule effectively. As a result, he established a co-regency with Crown Prince Tuthmosis before his death. Amenhotep III was buried in the first tomb created in the West Valley of the Kings, known as WV-22. In plan, it was very similar to the tomb of Tuthmosis IV at KV-43. It consisted of 2 corridors separated by a stairwell leading to a well chamber with a shaft and side chamber, a pillared chamber with a side descent and corridor, a stairwell, another chamber, and a burial chamber. The burial chamber had several side chambers leading off of it. The tomb was decorated with representations of the deceased with deities. Sometime during the 3rd Intermediate Period, his mummy was moved to tomb KV-35 along with several other pharaohs. Queen T would outlive Amenhotep III by at least 12 years. He would also leave behind a country that was at the very height of its power and influence. The resulting upheavals from his son Akhenaten would shake the very foundations of Egyptian belief and bring forth the question of whether a pharaoh was more powerful than the existing domestic order as represented by the Amun priests and their numerous estates? We receive the answer to that question in the next episode. Thank you for joining us.